So after 3 years, we finally got a new set of Battle Pass weapons in Genshin Impact. So should you start grabbing these weapons, or should you stick with previous Battle Pass weapons? In this video, I'll be reviewing all of the new 5 weapons. I'll be telling you which characters they work on the best, and when is it worth it to grab them, if at all. So yeah, let's begin. Alright, so starting off with the Battle Pass sword. First of all, it's going to give you 510 base attack at level 90 with a 28% crit rate substat. So that already makes it a decent 4-star stat stick. It's basically the same base stats as the Black Sword, the previous Battle Pass weapon, and also the Wolf Fang. So that's going to be pretty good. Now moving on to the passive, which is the most important part. The passive says that after using an elemental skill, it's going to give you Swift Stride, which is the name of the buff, and it's going to last for 14 seconds. It can trigger once every 14 seconds, and it's removed when the character leaves the field. So that's the big thing. That means the passives only work with characters when they're on field. Any off-field played characters are not going to work with this sword, unfortunately. So that already wipes out like half of the sword roster. But yeah, either way, if they work with it, just after using their elemental skill, it's going to increase their attack by 20% to 40% at refinement 1, depending on the distance they have traveled per second during the buff duration. And it's going to refresh every second to measure your distance. So that's actually one of the weirdest buffs you'll ever see. Honestly, I think it's the first time we saw something like that. But it's just that you start at 20%, and then the more distance you travel, the more attack you get. Now, I'm not sure how much you actually need to travel for you to maximize the passive, but I would assume it's going to be something realistic. So I'd assume you're probably going to be able to max it within like 3-4 seconds or something around that. And when you do, you're going to gain 40% attack, which is pretty good in my opinion. As I explained before, usually you're going to use this on main, like on-field characters, main DPSs, or just drivers. And usually you're going to be like dodging and moving with these characters, so traveling distance shouldn't be a huge problem. Again, as long as the distance you need to travel is reasonable, which I would assume they're going to make it reasonable. So yeah, basically this sword is just going to give attack and crit, which is going to be a pretty good buff, and that's going to work on basically any on-field character almost. So you have something like Ayaka, for example, that can work, Keqing that can work on her, especially with her teleportation. I think you can probably cover the distance thing just much faster, which is pretty good. Ayato, it can work on him. Alhaitham doesn't need attack, unfortunately, so it's not going to be good, but you can use it as like a crit stat stick. It's going to work on Clarand, Skirt, that's going to work, and that's pretty much it really for characters who can perfectly use it. And you can even use it for other characters like Sibai, for example, as just like a crit stat stick if you don't have any better options. Now for all of these characters, I don't think it's going to be like much better than previous weapons they had, or even better at all, honestly. I don't think it's going to be the best 4-star option for any of those, to be honest, because the previous 2 Battle Pass weapons are going to give you like more specialized buffs in general. Like the Black Sword is just going to give you normal and charge attacks damage bonus, and it's also going to heal you, which is probably better for characters who use normal and charge attacks. Wolf Fang is going to buff your elemental skill and burst, but this weapon is just going to be like more general. It's just going to give you attack. So it's more universal, but then that means it's probably not going to be like the best 4-star overall for most of these characters. So just keep that in mind. But I would say if you don't already have like a Battle Pass weapon, you don't have a crit weapon in general, whether it's a 5-star weapon or it's a 4-star weapon or it's another Battle Pass weapon, and you need one for your on-field character like one of these, then honestly I think it's a pretty good weapon to get, especially because, as I said, it's universal. So if you get it, you can definitely use it on a huge roster of characters. Just basically any on-field sword user, it's gonna work almost. So yeah, pretty universal weapon, nothing special, but I do think it's pretty decent. I like the sword, especially if you don't have many good crit swords already. Alright, now moving on to the Claymore. The new Battle Pass Claymore is also going to have average attack and then also a crit rate substat, which is pretty good. It's also going to make it a pretty good stat stick. Same thing with the Serpent Spine, and also the exact same thing with the Talking Stick. Now moving on to the Claymore's passive, it's also going to be kind of weird. All of these weapons are kind of like super creative in how their passives work, which is sometimes good, but sometimes it's not the best thing in the world. Either way, this weapon's passive is going to be called Precision Instrument, so it's going to grant you a buff in the following order every 10 seconds. So whenever the battle starts, every 10 seconds you're going to get a buff of these in order. So it's going to start with the first buff, 10 seconds, move to the second buff, and so on. But yeah, the first buff is just going to give you 20% attack, pretty good in standard. Second buff is going to give you 120 elemental mastery, and then the third buff is going to give you plus 32% stellar conduct and stellar swirl reaction damage, which is kind of weird to me because usually in like battle pass weapons you think they're going to be like more universal in general. We rarely see battle pass weapons having like region specific buffs buffs like this, but this time I guess we do. Either way, after that, if the character has triggered the Stellar Conduct or Stellar Swirl reaction, the current buff will also be retained and extended by 12 seconds. This effect can trigger once every 12 seconds. Now, the wording is kind of vague also, because this means that whenever you trigger a Stellar Conduct or basically any stellar reaction, the current buff is going to be locked in. But when they say retained, I would assume it's just going to be locked in, and then the other buffs are going to keep cycling. So you're able to have 2 buffs at a time. That's going to make this weapon much more like logical in my opinion, because then if you have the 20% attack buff, for example, you do a stellar reaction, then your 20% attack is going to be locked in for 24 seconds basically, and then you can move to the elemental mastery buff after 10 seconds are done. So I would assume you're able to get 2 buffs of these. That's going to make it much better. If it's only 1 buff, that's going to be much worse in my opinion. It's going to be almost just non-usable, because then like you're basically never get into the other buffs, especially the Stellar Conducts buff, I would assume, since Stellar Conducts characters are going to be the one needing it, but then they're going to be locking the attack buff as soon as they have it. So it's much more logical to assume that you're going to have 2 buffs instead of 1 buff. Either way though, in that case, there's still going to be some randomness because having 2 buffs while the weapon has 3, so you don't exactly know what you're going to get, but it's going to be much better than 1. But yeah, either way, this weapon in general just gives you attack, elemental mastery, and then Stellar Conduct and Stellar Swirl damage, and then crit from the substat. Right now, mainly we don't really have any actual Claymore characters who can use this weapon fully, because we don't really have any Claymore Stellar Conduct related characters except snezhnaya, obviously. So snezhnaya is going to be the best user for this weapon, but I'm not even sure if that's going to be her best free-to-play weapon or even 4-star weapon. I mean, it's not free-to-play, it's just 4-star, but yeah, it might be actually. It might be the best 4-star weapon, but I don't think it's going to be by much, especially compared to the other forgeable weapons that we're going to review in another video. But yeah, either way, the only full user for this weapon is just going to be snezhnaya, who's going to be able to use the full weapon to its full extent. But other Claymore characters can potentially use it, like D-Luke for example. He can take advantage out of the crit, the attack, and also the elemental mastery, so it can be pretty valuable. You just want to keep the rotations under 20 seconds in general, and that's going to be good for him. Same thing with Moika for example. I think she can probably use it. If you're playing Melt Moika, she can take advantage out of the attack and also the elemental mastery, which is pretty good. Gaming is also a good user for this weapon, but less good users are going to be Kinnish for example, Razor for example, Varka. All of these characters don't necessarily need elemental mastery. Varka might in some teams, but in general it's not the best thing on him, so they're only going to be using this weapon for the crit as like a stat stick and some attack that's only going to last for 10 seconds. But yeah, in general, do I like this Claymore? I don't think it's bad. I think it's average in my opinion. I like it as like a stat stick, and I also like the kind of like versatile buffs. I don't like that it's going to be a region specific sort of, but attack and elemental mastery are always going to be appreciated. But I also don't like the randomness of the weapon. That's never good usually. Do I think you should get it? Probably not. I think the Serpent Spine is just going to be much more valuable. The Serpent Spine literally rivals like 5-star weapons on some characters. It's just going to give you damage bonus if the character is on field. So if you're playing on field characters, which is mainly what this weapon is aimed towards, then I think the Serpent Spine is generally just better. But it's not a bad weapon overall too. Now moving on to the third battle pass weapon we have, which is going to be the Polearm. The Polearm is going to have average base attack, but it's the only weapon actually that's not going to have crit as a substat, which is kind of disappointing. It's going to give you energy recharge instead of crit. I guess we already have enough crit Polearms, so it kind of makes sense, but in general, crit is always better. I mean, the previous 2 have crit, so it's kind of weird that it doesn't, but either way, this weapon's passive is going to be much more simpler and also universal in my opinion. So triggering a cryo or hydro related elemental reaction is going to increase your attack by 20% for 15 seconds. And it's also going to regenerate 6 elemental energy for every other party member than your equipping character. So basically you equip this weapon on a character, they trigger a hydra or cryo related elemental reaction, they get 20% attack, and then their teammates get 6 energy. Pretty decent. And the main thing is that I think it's going to be pretty easy to trigger because your character doesn't need to be cryo or hydro. You just need to trigger either a hydro or cryo related elemental reaction, which in my opinion covers a lot of teams. As long as your team has like consistent cryo or hydro, you're usually good. So if you're using it on like Xiangling for example and she vaporizes, then you get the buff. So yeah, I think it's pretty easy to trigger in most teams at least. And yeah, when you do, it's just gonna give you attack and then energy to your team, and also give you energy recharge from the substat. It looks like it's more directed towards like support. It's more of like a support polearm, kind of like a Walmart version of the Favonius, I would say, but it also gives the characters some attack. If we're talking about characters who can use it, honestly a lot of them can. So you have Alyosha, that's probably the best option. Aluga can use it. it, you can trigger the Hydra reaction, just the Hydra crystallize, and that's gonna work. When your crystallize is gonna count as like a Hydra reaction, so yeah. Shinha can use it in mostly like freeze teams. Escoffier can use it. Xiaoling can use it if you're playing over the Cryo or Hydra, obviously, which is usually the case. And yeah, for all of these characters, it's gonna give them energy recharge, which all of them need, and that's gonna give them some attack, which all of them also need, and then also support your team. So it's kind of like a Favonius alternative in my opinion. I do like this weapon. Do I think it's better than the Favonius? Probably not. I mean, it's gonna give less energy than the Favonius overall, but the thing is, at least you don't need to build crit, so that's also good. Overall though, I do think it's a decent usable weapon, probably like A tier for most supports I listed before, so yeah, I do think the Polearm is pretty good. Alright, now moving on to the Battle Pass Catalyst. For its main stats, it's also going to be pretty much the same thing. Average base stack and then a crit rate substat, which is more balanced than the Sacrificial Jade, which is pretty good. Either way though, this Catalyst is going to give you 20% attack after you use an elemental skill, and also 100 elemental mastery, which is pretty good in my opinion. The catch though is that it's only going to last for 6 seconds, which is going to be pretty short, and it can only trigger every 12 seconds. So you're going to have 6 seconds of downtime basically, and you also need to use your elemental skill again after 12 seconds to trigger it. But you can extend this when you hit an opponent with your charge attack. In that case, you can extend it by an extra 6 seconds. So basically to have full uptime on this weapon, you'd want to use your elemental skill, then charge attack after 6 seconds. And then you're going to have 20% attack and 100 elemental mastery, which is pretty good and reasonable in my opinion, especially for on-field characters. I think they can probably use it much better. For off-field characters, it might be a little clunky because you won't be able to charge attack with them, and if you do just for the weapon, it's going to feel a little clunky and maybe mess with your rotations. So in my opinion, that's mostly an on-field weapon. It's gonna work better with on-field characters. If we're looking for Catalyst characters who can use it, honestly there's a huge variety, like a lot of characters can use it, both on-field and off-field, to different extents of course, but mainly I think Grizzly is probably gonna be the best user for this weapon. I'm not sure if it's gonna be his best weapon, or even like his best 4-star weapon, but it's definitely gonna be like a top tier weapon, at least A tier. Same thing with the Klee basically. I think Klee and Grizzly are probably the best users overall, but you can use it on many more characters like Miko for example. Nefer can use this somewhat for the elemental mastery and the crit. Baressa can use it for the attack. For Miko, obviously it's not going to have full uptime, but either way, it's kind of usable. For all of these characters though, almost, I'm not sure if it's going to be the best 4-star weapon, but it's going to be decent, either B tier or A tier for most of them. So yeah, overall, it's not bad. It's decent, I would say. I think it's going to be better on recent characters than the Solar Pearl, because a lot of their damage is mostly like reaction based. It might be an upgrade over that, but in general, it's not super good, but it's also not bad at all either. So I think it's decent. I like it. And now we finally have the bow. It's gonna have the same base stats, average base stack, and then crit rate as a substat, which is pretty good. And it's also similar to previous crit weapons. I mean, the Scion bow is gonna have higher base attack and lower crit rate, but I think that's worse. I would prefer than average base stack and then kind of high crit rate substat. Alright, now for its passive, it's kind of pretty simple really. It's almost like the previous Sumeru weapons. I remember some weapons having this exact same passive, but either way, it's just that every other character in the team will provide a buff to the equipping character depending on whether their elemental type is the same or not. If it's the same, they're going to gain 24 elemental mastery. If the elements is different, the equipping character is going to gain 12% attack. So it can give you either attack or elemental mastery with up to 3 stacks. If we're looking for characters who can use that, I mean, it's mainly just crit, attack, and then elemental mastery. Honestly, it's mainly just Linnea that I would think of. That's probably going to be pretty good. Usually you're going to be playing her with other Geos, so it can give her elemental mastery, which she needs. And then the crit is obviously going to be pretty good on her too. I think Venti is also going to be pretty good with this weapon. Usually you're going to be playing him with different elements, so that's going to give him attack, and that's going to be pretty good with the same thing with the crit. So they're like the best users for this weapon, but overall it can literally work on any character. It's a very simple stat stick, like literally a very wide range from like Fischl, for example, if you want to use it as like a crit and attack stat stick. It can work on Yellen, for example. It can work on Line, Setos, Chaska. Any character basically can use it as like a simple stat stick. Now I'm not sure if it's going to be the best on any of them, but it's a decent stat stick weapon. Pretty simple, not much going on, literally just crit, some attack, some elemental mastery, and that's it. So yeah, I do like the bow. Now overall, my conclusion for these weapons, honestly, I do like them. I don't think they're anything special or anything like revolutionary, but most of these weapons I do like, and I think they're pretty good weapons, especially if you don't already have like crit 4-star weapons or good 5-star weapons or something like that. Then these weapons can be pretty good, except like the Claymore. That's probably the only weapon that I actually actually don't like. But it's not bad, it's just like too random for my liking. But most of these weapons are gonna be decent in my opinion. But yeah, that was the video guys. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.